This episode is brought to you by Morty, Buzzshot, Cogs by Clockwork Dog, Recon, and Patreon supporters like you.
Cogs by Clockwork Dog is an easy-to-use software-hardware platform for running interactive events, including escape rooms and other immersive experiences. Their plug-and-play hardware seamlessly integrates with their software, so you can create a show with lighting and sound cues without having to write a single line of code. Map all kinds of inputs to outputs by building up simple logic steps, which determine what you want to happen and when. If you're new to immersive tech, Cogs can empower you to create without writing any code at all. Using simple building blocks, you can create any kind of puzzle in the software, and their system will tell the hardware exactly what to do. And if you're a seasoned maker, they have an abundance of tools to expand your capabilities. Create any form of logic by using their expression language. Build your own plugins for external software or hardware, and create your own custom content for things like physical or touchscreen interactions. Get the Cogs starter set for only $130 plus free shipping to the USA. This bundle is usually valued at $257. You can learn more and purchase your starter set at cogs.show. Use code REPOD at checkout. That's REPOD. Link and details in the show notes.
Welcome to the Reality Escape Pod, your lifeline when you need a getaway from the real world. I'm David Spira, alongside my co-host, PG Law. Together, we're exploring immersive gaming from all angles, and we'll be joined by guests who really know their stuff. This season, we're shining a spotlight on Southern California in celebration of our convention, Recon, which will be in Los Angeles, California on August 18th and 19th, 2024. Tickets are on sale now at realityescapecon.com. And today's guests are the creators of Hatch Escapes, Terry Pettigrew-Rolapp and Tommy Wallach. Since 2017, they have been blending their unique talents in art and business to create and operate some of Southern California's most iconic and enduring games and experiences. Welcome, Terry and Tommy.
Such a pleasure.
Thanks, David.
Now, we have a lot of famous married couple duos in the escape room industry. And while you two are not married, you have probably been working together creatively and as friends for more than a lot of marriages. How did you guys meet?
That was amazing. Thank you for that, PG.
I didn't know she was going to do that.
Yeah, beautiful. It's so true. We met at a high school program at NYU. So a program at NYU for high school students, a summer program in writing for musical theater. I believe I was 16 and Terry was 17. We are literally at a quarter of a century of some form of collaboration. We wrote a musical together back then, and then we didn't collaborate again until Hatch, but remained very close.
Tommy's partner is very gracious in that she shares Tommy with me in a lot of ways. So I love the way you set that up. On the other hand, I know that she's mostly grateful for the break. So it's community service.
So you met in high school and you've been friends, but you didn't collaborate or work on anything together until Lab Rat?
We were pretty closely involved in each other's artistic lives, so we were constantly seeing and commenting on each other's work. Tommy mostly as a writer of novels, me mostly as a writer in the theater. But it's true that other than the occasional one-off gimmicky thing, including school projects, as we ended up going to college together, we didn't really collaborate professionally until Hatch.
What made you decide that this was the project you were going to work on together?
Well, Tommy had some of his books that were in the process of getting Hollywoodized, and so he came out to California, where I was living at the time, running a moving and storage business, and he dragged me out to an escape room that I did not want to go to, but I don't know, I like Tommy, so I went, and we played a room, and it was just immediately apparent to us that somewhere between our two basket of skills, we could do this, and we knew we could do a decent job at it, and we knew we had things to add. It just kind of came naturally once we saw what escape rooms are.
Yeah, the combination of game, which Terry and I are both passionate gamers of video games and tabletop games, and the theater, which is a more esoteric passion, I think, amongst escape room owners, to be honest, to the medium's detriment, potentially, whereas video games and board games are very heavy in people's interests. But that's where Terry and I live, is between games and theater. And when we played The Room, we realized immediately, oh, this is a medium that captures, in some ways, the best of both of those media, with many exceptions. But crucially, we realized that it was a medium still in its infancy. And that's incredibly exciting to think you can be the one doing new things and pushing the bar forward, which is difficult to impossible in some of the more legacy media.
And I think also escape rooms, it's a funny comparison, but there's really something going on to it. They have a lot more in common with musical theater than you'd think, in that they're highly contrived forms that require these sort of timeouts from the story that can't be timeouts if you're telling a good story. And so the basket of skills that we had developed around crafting stories with interludes, I think gave us a leg up in figuring out how to craft stories with puzzles.
When you say a timeout, do you mean like in musical theater when there's like a song? Is that the timeout that you're referring to?
Yes, but while there's the amateur urge to take a timeout during songs, it's obviously never the right way to go. The last 100 years of musical theater development taught us to do the opposite, that the story has to proceed in song. I think we've largely tried to bring that into our story-based puzzle design, that the puzzles are not an interruption from the story, they must be a continuation of that. And I think we've been able to use some of our music theater skills to advance that goal.
Aside from your collaboration in the musical theater world, you both have some pretty unusual backgrounds, even amongst the escape room crowd, which usually comes with having an unusual background. What have you both been doing in the 20 years or so that led up to the creation of Hatch Escapes?
I can start, but yes, you're absolutely right. It turned out to be incredibly complementary for what we needed to achieve. The difference between me and Terry is I have deep dived nonstop in one thing. I bring one thing to the table, and Terry brings about 1,000 things to the table. Luckily, my thing is important, or else I wouldn't be needed in this couple. I would be vestigial. I have been writing. I've just been writing in different media. I wrote a bunch of young adult novels. I have written for film and TV, at least a little bit, written musical theater, though that's more recent, and just been honing that craft and nothing else since I was 17 for hours a day, 365 days a year. Terry, I'll let him speak for himself, but the compliment here is Terry has about 1,000 skills, and that is incredibly necessary in this business. But Terry, I'll let you talk about that.
Thanks, Tommy. Yeah, I've been all over the map. I was definitely a computer nerd of a kid. I was part of that generation that was out there figuring out what this thing was, and I was a kid that loved to code and loved to play around with circuits and computers. But that always remained a side passion. I never pursued that as a career. On the other hand, starting in high school, perhaps just because I was a computer kid, and it was back in the days when kids knew more about computers than adults did, I started a graphic arts business, kind of out of my bedroom, that did fairly well for what a teenager's supposed to be able to do, to the extent that it largely put me through college. But then I got a bit of an education bug. I took a year off of college and moved to East Africa, where I taught junior high school math and really got into teaching. So when I graduated from NYU, where I did playwriting alongside Tommy, I became a teacher. I went and joined the New York City Public Schools, and I was an English teacher for 3 years. And then I switched it up and went back and taught at NYU for 4. For all of that, I was still writing for the musical theater, but eventually I kind of lost the taste for it. And I had this insane idea that maybe it would make sense for me to go back home to California, where I grew up, and take over the family moving and storage business, which my grandfather had run, and then my father after that. And for whatever reason, I thought that'd be a good idea. And so I packed it up along with my husband at the time. We moved cross country, and I took that over. And boy, oh boy, was that a journey, because, first of all, I had to get out of the education and art space and figure out what the business space actually meant, and ultimately ended up getting an MBA, and I got quite into it. It was a lot of fun in some ways. The moving and storage industry is a bit more like the mafia than most people are aware. It's this insane business full of all these semi-powerful families jockeying for position in the interstate highway system. It's a little silly, but definitely a place to learn some skills. So I did the moving and storage industry for about a decade. And that, of course, includes a lot of logistics and warehousing, which are complementary skills that play into this as well.
Like I said, really eclectic backgrounds.
Yeah.
I also have to tell you, Terry, when I found out that you worked in the moving industry, that was probably the most surprising thing I've learned about a human being in my life.
Fair. Very fair.
Yeah.
Very fair.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, definitely don't judge a book by its cover moment. So, on that subject, Terry, you own the Hatch Escapes building, and it's a pretty strange building. What's the story behind it?
Oh, goodness. So it is a 24,000 square foot, 6-story, 1927 concrete warehouse in the middle of what is now the Arlington Heights neighborhood of Los Angeles. Back when it was built, it would have been in the middle of West Adams, which was the original Beverly Hills of LA before there was a Beverly Hills. But when they built the 10 freeway right through the middle of West Adams, the part to the north became Arlington Heights and immediately was blighted. And that's where this building exists. So for the last 60, 70 years, it's been essentially in a no man's land part of LA and operating as a moving and storage warehouse. When it was first built, though, it was a fur coat storage warehouse. And you can still see the nest actually exists within the vaults that were specifically designed to hold ladies' fur coats during the summer months. Because again, this was the Beverly Hills of the 1920s and 30s. So that warehouse came into my family and my family's moving and storage business around the 1960s. And in my childhood, it was a place that we often went on the way to and from Dodgers games because it just happened to be geographically on the way. And we went to a lot of Dodgers games. The family would always check in on what we called the 3rd Avenue warehouse on the way to the games. And, you know, it was a kind of a fun place for a kid to explore. It's a bit haunted looking at that building.
It's a fun place for adults to explore.
Yeah. And it feels a bit like a world 100 years ago in a lot of ways.
We're going to get to the nest in a little bit, but the first time that you had given me and Lisa a tour of the building was the day before Lisa and I then went to Imagineering to meet up with Jeff and Jarrett from the Scout Expedition Company. And they were telling us how they were trying to find a home for this game that they had built in a storage unit. And I was like,
how fortuitous.
Terry had just shown me these really strange mink coat storage units in the Hatch building. I bet you could build there.
Wild. What are the odds?
And the rest is history.
On that subject now, let's explore your games a little bit. Your first game, Lab Rat, stands out as one of the long-standing must-play escape rooms of Los Angeles. It's a story-forward escape room, especially when you consider that it predates story being a strong consideration in escape room design. What were your goals and expectations going into that first production?
When we decided to do Hatch, we had 4 scripts that we wrote before we picked one.
Of course you did.
Yeah, and they were fully drafted, but, you know, we had spent months on them, Tommy and I. And, you know, Lab Rat is just the one that we ultimately decided to go with. And the thing I think they all had in common was we were trying to solve some of the basic story stuff. Because any escape room that we'd seen up until that point, and still the vast majority of escape rooms, even the brand new ones that come out today, just really aren't doing story in any kind of reasonable way. They may have some kind of a backstory, some kind of a setup, the events that happen before the play experience begins. But typically, once play starts, the story goes on pause. And whatever the central gesture of the story is, you know, breaking into the tomb or escaping from the laboratory, while there are active things that are happening, they're not really advancing the story forward in terms of character, in terms of plot. There aren't really twists. There aren't really beats, moments when things are changing. And Tommy and I were seeking to experiment in that. Could we actually have a story with story beats? Could it follow story form? Could it feel like an arc? And I think all 4 of the scripts that we were playing with did that to one degree or another.
That's funny. Terry gave the answer I usually give, so I'll give the answer also that he would usually give, which is, coming from a theatrical background, we had noticed that the vast majority of escape rooms that we played had not learned or utilized some of the kind of most basic production, rules of the theater, involving the best ways to use lighting, sound, music. So there were some production issues that we were really excited about. And then the last thing I'll say is certainly from a puzzle standpoint, puzzles are something that escape rooms Many of them were doing just fine, actually. Like, that wasn't a weakness of early escape rooms necessarily. What was the integration of puzzle into gameplay, or what we call diegesis. I assume probably most of your audience knows this word diegesis by now, I would wager.
Let's define it anyway.
Diegesis is the term for basically when something is presented as a part of the narrative itself. So the thing that people use as the easiest example to get your head around is music. The thing I like to say is the John Williams music that plays at the beginning of Star Wars is non-diegetic music. It is not playing in the world of the movie, but when you go to the cantina on whatever planet the cantina is on, I don't even know. That's
Tatooine.
Thank you, Tatooine. That is diegetic music. That music is being heard by the characters. It's in it.
That's a great example.
I go Star Wars. I don't even like Star Wars. Don't tell people. Oh, no, I said it on the podcast. But yeah, so with puzzles, as Terry was talking about with songs in musicals, potentially, the impulse still for a lot of people is you have a narrative, and then you're just like, for some reason, this alien culture put a combo lock here and a cipher that anyone could translate in about 5 minutes. And they weren't really thinking about, like, could we make this make a lick of sense for people to keep them immersed?
So we had recorded a full Lab Rat Spoilers Club episode for patrons last year. So we're not going to rehash that. You should definitely check it out and listen to it because it's one of the best episodes we've recorded. But we are curious, what are some of the key lessons that Lab Rat has taught you about escape room design?
We made a very important philosophical decision at the beginning of Hatch, at least up until now. It's something we might want to transcend at some point. And that was that we were going to make rooms that were funny. There's a better word probably than funny, but again, not unlike musical theater in this way. The things about the medium that catch for a lot of people that people don't like. With escape rooms, it's very difficult to sell a truly immersive drama. You know that you walked into a storefront in a strip mall, and you know that you were greeted by a 23-year-old working for minimum wage on summer break. You know all these things, and so when you're in the room and then they're like, okay, there's a zombie apocalypse, you're like, okay, I guess there's a zombie apocalypse, sure. We decided early on, we're going to make sure that people know we're having a good time. We know how silly this is. We're all in on the joke together. And we actually think that's more immersive in the end. That's one thing.
It's a little bit campy. I mean, musical theater leans into the camp. I think Lab Rat definitely does a little bit too. And I think you're right in a sense that it lets us know, like, we're not going to be super, super serious about this.
To be clear, and I think Tommy actually hinted at this a bit, it's not that it's the only modality we're interested in pursuing. Heaven knows Mother of Frankenstein is a few hairs from melodrama in certain ways. And you know, we took a real risk going that direction. And I think we're going to try a bunch of other stuff too. I would love to at some point really do my take on a scary experience.
I want to see that.
Yeah, it'll come. But for now, we realized it would be an easier lift in a lot of ways because, you know, when you make it clear that we, the creators, are having fun, and we want you, the players or the protagonists, to be having fun, you just get a little bit more leeway when things don't line up 100%. Everyone's a bit more on the same page about, hey, we're just here to have a good time. And it buys you something in the immersive thing, but also I think just in the general goodwill thing.
I very much agree with that. I think that when the premise is not taking itself incredibly seriously, but the script is taking itself seriously, it is easier to just allow yourself to get locked into that world and say, all right, I'm here. I'm a human test subject in a rat's experiment. I'm with you. I got it. We can do this.
Yeah.
Totally.
I think also part of what I think makes Lab Rat somewhat successful is the pitch is so easy. It's like a 4-word pitch. It's so easy to wrap your head around, and yet it still manages to be surprising somehow.
I think that that's a key part of what makes some of my favorite games. It's not something we talk about, but the games that I am much more likely to talk about check 2 different boxes. First is they're just really good. The second is that they're really easy to explain. And so when someone asks me, what's your favorite game? I don't even know what my favorite game is, but I will probably answer with the easiest one for me to explain in that moment that I'm really happy to tell a person about. The answer I frequently go to is the Dome, because I can just tell people that The premise is that you are being given hallucinogens and put inside of a science experiment, and they don't give you any drugs, but they do make you believe you're hallucinating through magical set design. And even if people have never played an escape room, or they played one and they didn't like it, or they played a whole bunch and they love it, everyone can hear that and they're like, oh, damn, I want to play that.
Don't get me wrong, I love the Dome, but David, I think that is like 50% your ability to summarize. I'm not quite sure that I could have captured that room in such a short sentence.
It is famously a weird room.
Yeah, I don't know that it lands from a plotting or narrative standpoint, but from an experiential standpoint, it certainly lands.
Sure.
Well,
Definitely.
It did strike me what you said earlier, Terry, about how, like, so many of the escape room stories, especially in the early days, there was no discovery. We're escaping a prison and it's straightforward. That's just what you're doing. You don't have to really explain it because we already know, right? And so there's no effort there. But I like that your story, your test subjects, okay, we've all been in school. We know what lab rat means. And then the twist of flipping it on its head, I think that really just sealed the deal for me.
But that's still just setup, right? That's all the stuff that happens before you walk in the door. The part that Tommy and I have really been trying to advance is once the story begins, can we then have twists? Can we have moments where stakes change? Can we escalate or elevate tension? Can we have different acts where we're perhaps engaged in different kinds of actions for different kinds of reasons? That's what excites me. I think part of why Lab Rat's successful is because it does have a really good setup that is easy to understand and easy to jump into. But the part that I think Tommy and I are more interested in is what happens after all that.
I'm also impressed that you were able to do all that setup without a gigantic monologue from a GM or making us read through 10 pages of a diary.
Before we move on from that, I want to defend the Dome, and because the argument you just made is the argument that I hear a lot, and what I'm just going to say is the Dome is giving everybody what Huey Lewis was begging for.
Yes.
We got the drug, and it has none of the bad side effects. You just don't know exactly what happened while you're on it.
Oh yeah, and to be clear, I am more than impressed by what they've pulled off at the Dome.
No, the plot is a little bit impenetrable, and by a little bit I mean a lot bit.
So Lab Rat has been running for a very long time, but Lab Rat is one of the few games that has managed to consistently be highly rated even throughout the years, especially for how long it's been running. So what gives a good escape room the longevity that Lab Rat has had?
I've got two thoughts on that. I think one, partly it's just good luck. Being in Los Angeles, we're a city that people from all over the world travel to play escape games. So I think we benefit from what is essentially a limitless store of potential players that need time to come and find us. So I think that's part of what's going on. But I think also it's because Lab Rat is just a joy factory. You can really take anybody to it, and one way or another, they come out with a smile on their face. It's designed to be that way. It's not meant to really push anybody too hard. It's meant to be a celebration of the players and a celebration of fun. If it has lasting charm, I think that's a big part of it.
Terry, I have to say, I have played Lab Rat 3 different times. One of those times I brought the most miserable person I have ever had the displeasure of playing an escape room with, and even he left with a smile.
I won't ask who.
I couldn't tell you if I wanted to.
Okay, fair enough. I also think that there's something about the industry itself, and this isn't a flex at all. It's just about the nature of the business model of escape rooms. I've been very surprised that more people haven't opened up more interesting rooms. And I also want to temper this. Anyone who knows me has heard me say this a lot, but I will say it on this podcast. I am very proud of Lab Rat. If I were to play Lab Rat cold, my takeaway would be, okay.
Nice try.
That's fine. It's okay. Like it's almost has a story. It has 3 minutes worth of story, I guess. It was funny. So I have this feeling about our room too. I just want to be clear. But I've been blown away that more people aren't doing more interesting things. And I think the reason why is actually a business reason. This is an industry where to make something good actually costs quite a lot of money. We have spent a lot of money at Hatch. And you don't make very much money. The throughput is too low. It's a tough business model, and you have to have some financial runway just to get started in it. And I think that might actually explain it. But I think to your point, PG, that's why, is that the aspiration level is still kind of low.
We're taking a moment to thank our sponsor, Morty. Morty is a free app for discovering, planning, tracking, and reviewing escape rooms, haunts, and other immersive social outings. And Morty is now available for all to use on its fantastic website experience, iPhone app, and its new Android app, available in the Google Play Store now. I believe in Morty so much that I have a stake in it as an advisor. Escape room owners, did you know that you can claim your business within Morty? It's free, and it can allow you to reply to user reviews and more easily maintain your attractions, adjust your pricing, adjust any information about your company. You can do all of that if you claim your business. It will also provide a boost for you in that system. This is the kind of thing that is a win-win for escape room companies and for Morty and for players. You get more visibility and more accurate information. We players get more accurate information, and Morty can have a lot of trust in your listings. It's good for everybody and helps to make this ecosystem more sustainable.
You can learn more at morty.app/repod. That's REPOD to sign up and get a special badge for our listeners. Link and details in the show notes.
A few years ago, The Nest became the second game in the Hatch Escapes world. We interviewed its original creators, Jeff and Jarrett of the Scout Expedition Company, back on Season 3, Episode 10. So listeners can learn all about it there if they are interested. The Nest runs deep in emotion and offers essentially no challenge. Its defining characteristic is that it's beautifully painful. Since you have acquired The Nest, I am curious, what can you tell us about the audience for melancholy, low challenge escape rooms?
The line between immersive experience and escape room is this very strange, fuzzy boundary. And there is cause and justification for offense on both sides of this line. I think immersive people get offended when they are lumped in with escape rooms because they are trying to do something that is more professedly high art, and they think of escape rooms as strip mall, zombie apocalypse narratives. And so they are rightly offended when they get lumped in as immersive. And then escape room people, and I speak for myself certainly here, get offended when we are effectively ghettoized from the immersive community because we have gameplay. And that is very frustrating, particularly if you know the history of video games. If you know anything about video games, which we do, you know how this journey went, exactly how it developed, and it is the same journey for escape rooms. It is the exact same journey that video games did.
Agree.
Yeah. The audience for The Nest it's a little fancier. It's a little art kids. We had an immersive festival in town, and there were many people who came through our building to play The Nest and left still not knowing anything about what we did because they just were not interested in escape rooms.
It would have been somewhat unusual, not entirely unusual, but somewhat unusual for players to come to do Lab Rat and to come to do The Nest. They did feel somewhat distinct in terms of personality. I think that's less the case now, in part just because we co-market them and we share a web page, and I think people now associate them as two parts of the same coin. But I think they sell each other to a certain extent. While there are huge differences between The Nest and our other offerings, they do have a common backbone. They share a common ancestry anyway, or at least some common values that I think is really easy to see and fairly easy to sell. These days, I think there's a lot more bleed between, but certainly when we first were both opening, it did feel like they were rather different audiences.
To add on to what you were saying, Tommy, what you were just describing about the way that some of the immersive theater community and some of the escape room community feel about each other, that's also to some degree how I feel about being a podcaster, where I feel like most podcasts are garbage. Most podcasts are thoughtless, artless, people yammering, loaded with inside jokes. There's no thought at all about who the audience is or what it would be like or should be like for them to listen to the thing. And so I sometimes get a little bit uncomfortable when people ask me what I do. And like, well, I have this podcast. What I assume they are assuming that means makes me feel gross. But ultimately, that doesn't change the fact that this is a podcast. I make podcasts. I don't have to like every podcast to be a podcaster, and not every podcast, even when they're well made, has to be to my particular tastes and desires. And that's very much how I feel about when the debate comes up about whether the Nest is or isn't an escape room. I'm very emphatic that it is in every way structurally an escape room. There's two things that are slightly different about it, is that the dial on narrative has been cranked up pretty high. The dial on emotion has been, as far as I'm concerned, maxed out. And the dial on challenge has been pulled back. But structurally, everything else about it, if you look at it on paper, is an escape room.
Right. That's absolutely true. And it even has puzzles in it. The other thing I'll say about the Nest, which I've always found really interesting, and I think the Nest is wonderful, and I'm so glad to have it in the building, and I think it does lots of things really well. To Terry's point, you said it turns narrative way up. It turns backstory way up. Doesn't really turn narrative way up. It doesn't have any narrative. It has a backstory. You are utterly disconnected in all ways, shapes, and forms from the actual narrative of that room. And I think, hopefully this isn't too much of a spoiler, I won't say details, but I think Jeff and Jarrett are geniuses because they do a very devious trick in the Nest that should be illegal, which is the experience itself is pretty affecting, but that's not what gets you. What gets you is something that happens after the room is over. And it's kind of a cheat, but it's a brilliant cheat, and I give them full credit for it.
It really is.
But those who have played know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
I agree with you, and I also think you might be right. Maybe it should be illegal.
Oh, I don't know that it should. I think it's so brilliant it can't be illegal. And on top of that, we at the end of the day we're not just storytellers. We are experience designers.
Yeah.
And that is part of the designed experience, and I think part of why it's so effective.
You're right.
Gets my stamp of approval.
To me, it's also what has elevated it into an art piece. And I don't usually say that a lot, but similar experiences I've seen in art museums, and not nearly as effectively because you haven't spent an hour being immersed in the backstory and having these thoughts go through your head.
I want to add to that. One of the moments in Lab Rat that I think a lot of people talk about a lot is the ball moment, right? There's this moment where you get a ball up into a ball track and some silly music plays and there's some silly lights and you follow a ball as it goes along a ball track and the story completely stops. And it's just a moment of joy and celebration. And I think there's room for that kind of stuff in what we do. Sometimes you need to take a break and just be in a moment where we're going to feel. We're going to feel, we're going to dance, we're going to be giddy, we're going to be in our bodies in a very real way and not thinking very much. And I think it's very fair what Nest does there at the end, because it's one of those moments, and I'm for it. My vote goes yes.
Oh, I'm all for it. I love it.
Me too. You know what I'm saying. I'm not against it. I'm just saying it's devious. It's a devious move.
Mm-hmm.
It's emotional judo.
Yes, exactly.
You do it to you.
Oh, that's nice. I have become more and more of the opinion, and Terry and I are going to do a talk about this, it seems, that actually it might be a mistake for us to try to do traditional narrative in escape rooms. And I don't want to necessarily open that whole rabbit hole, but what I will say is, to Terry's point about moments of emotion and joy, it might be that our best bet is to find a way to more elegantly inspire those moments, and not to try to do it through the recreation of what is effectively a cinematic structure of storytelling. But I'll leave that there.
BuzzShot is escape room software powering business growth, player marketing, and improving the customer experience. They offer an assortment of pre- and post-game features, including robust waiver management, branded team photos, and streamlined review management for Yelp, TripAdvisor, Google Reviews, and Morty. BuzzShot now also has integration with our other REPOD sponsors, Morty and Cogs. BuzzShot has different configurations and workflows to suit your unique business needs. Whether you're just starting out or you're looking to scale, standardize, and automate the things that take up your staff's time, you should join the thousands of other escape room owners and game masters using BuzzShot. If you haven't done this already, you will not believe how standardization and automation will improve your life and your business.
Here's what Lisa Gregory of Escape Rooms Unlocked had to say about BuzzShot. BuzzShot saves us significant staff time and allows us to standardize our procedures for all employees. What a relief.
Streamline your marketing and grow your escape room business. REPOD listeners get an extended free trial and 20% off your first 3 months with no setup fees or hidden charges. Visit buzzshot.com/repod, that's REPOD, to learn more. Link and details in the show notes.
Last week, PG and I just played your latest game, The Ladder. We played it twice. First of all, I want to say congratulations on launching it.
Thanks.
It is one of the most ambitious and unusual escape games that I have seen in my 1,200 game career. I personally loved it. Tell us what The Ladder is and what you set out to do with it.
Let me give you the quick elevator pitch. It is your 50-year career at a corrupt pharmaceutical company, and it's playing on the tropes of 5 decades. We're in the mailroom in the 50s, we're in the secretarial pool in the 60s, we were in middle management in the 70s, information technology in the 80s, and the corner office in the 90s. And the tone is similar to Lab Rat. It is a bit tongue-in-cheek, it is a bit camp, but it's also satire. In a way, I guess Lab Rat is to a certain extent. We're certainly saying things about laboratories and the relationship between humans and animals. But in this case, it really is a send-up of big business, similar to, and we're not shy about this, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, which is, a piece of music theater that Tommy and I both quite adore, but, won the Pulitzer Prize because it's raising real questions about corporate culture. And I think we were trying to do something similar, to make this business piece be actually a story of ethics. And a story of what are you willing to do to get ahead? To what extent will you compromise your values to advance your career? To me, that's quite interesting.
We were certainly continuing to try to push narrative in the way that we discussed. Character, a little bit more movement on character, beats where you're doing different things, growth, stakes, tension, all that stuff. But I think the more interesting stuff is trying to do a couple things that video games have been doing for a long time that hadn't yet made it into escape games in a useful way. One of those is this question of replayability, which fascinatingly is not a business imperative, which I think is what most people assume, which is that you put in replayability so that you can sell more tickets because people want to come back. A popular escape room doesn't need to do that. Lab Rat's not replayable, and it's been open for 7 years because you just can't put enough people through in the course of a year to really need it. What replayability does is it offers people 2 things. One, the ability to return with friends for joy, to share this experience with people, unlike saying I did the thing and now it's exhausted. I can't share it with anyone because I can't go because I know everything in it, so there will be nothing for me to do, which does matter to a fair number of people who love this medium. And then the other part is that replayability is sort of a euphemism for more content than you know what to do with, for a feeling of inexhaustibility and possibility. And so we achieve that through sort of 2 main vectors. The first one is the more traditional video game one of a branching narrative and choices of certain levels of importance. I did some quick math here just for fun, and if you were to put it all together, there are about 3.9 million outcome states, just given every possible choice you could make in the game. If you just do the combinatorics on that, you get 3.888 million. So that's one way, is just through all of these outcome states. So you feel like you see different things, different cutscenes, different plot beats. But then the other part was mechanical, was about gameplay. In each of the sort of 5 decades of this room, with some interesting exceptions, but more or less, there are 2 totally different things to do. One of them is traditional escape room puzzles, where once you know the answer, you do know the answer, and you could more or less just come back in and enter the answer and be done. But that isn't the kind of majority of what most people do when they play. It's playing in each room 3 scored games. And those games are effectively infinite. The more interesting ones you'd probably have to play for maybe an hour and a half each before you would exhaust it, and you're in there playing for about 12 minutes probably. So between those two, we've created an environment where there is something like replayability, and we wanted to tackle that.
The latter has an incredible amount of video content, but most of it is unseen in any given playthrough. Talk to us about how you're using video.
Sure. Well, first of all, it does have a ton of video content, but you're never looking at a screen, at least within the world of the game, right? A bit of a spoiler alert. When you see video, it's in reflections in a mirror or through the upper pane of a door with a glass frame in it or on a poster on the wall or out the window of the corner office. So we've, in every case, tried to make sure that whatever video you're seeing doesn't feel like we're just encountering a giant iPad, but rather that we are encountering characters in real spaces in ways that are theatrical and interesting.
How much video did you actually have in this thing?
Probably approaching 2 hours. The vast majority of that, of course, is up against green screens. Not only do we have a lot of video content, there is a ton of VFX going on to really make that stuff sell. And the other thing to say about it is that, this takes place across 5 decades. And when we did our shoot day, we had a cast of 27 actors, hair, makeup, costumes for 27 actors across 5 decades. There's a level of stupid commitment there.
But the production value is really polished, and we could see that immediately. It was clear that you used professional actors for all of the scenes. The production value really, I think, helps seal it, and I think it was worth the effort.
Thank you. Also, you can draw more famous people to this than someone who has to do it 40 hours a week or something like that. And it allowed us to do a shoot with Hollywood film and makeup people, and we used aging makeup in that scene where Stab is at his oldest, so the character that you watch age up over the 50 years.
Your main antagonist is Stab Backner.
And we age him up in each decade because you're with him for 50 years, this antagonist. He was in the chair for 3.5, 4 hours to be done up in his oldest version. It was the real deal makeup. It was really, really fun.
It looked great. Now, I know the game is still young, but you have been working on it for a very long time. Setting aside COVID and the massive amount of problems that it created for you, I am curious, if you could go back in time and change something in your approach to producing this game, what would it be?
Oh, God, we can talk for hours and hours and hours and hours.
Well, you've got literal minutes.
When we set out to do the latter, once we had a script in place, we'd never put a very good plan in place. There were some decent logistical reasons for that, although we will never proceed like this again. Hatch Escapes was started with 7 founders. And for various reasons, it became very clear that Tommy and I were really the only ones that were going to be moving this thing forward. So after we opened Lab Rat to decent reception, we had to buy out the other 5 founders. And this put us in a terrible position financially. Because although we had a successful game, we were just never going to have the money in place to build something equal to the vision we had of what we wanted our next project to be. And on top of that, we didn't have a team. I essentially built Lab Rat with my 2 hands and those of my son and those of a part-time employee that was with us for a couple of months. I mean, it was by and large a very, very small team with a very small set of hands. And the scale of the ladder is so much bigger. We knew we needed a massive team. So we started without money. We started without a budget. We started without a team, but we just decided we needed to get started because if we never did, we never would. And again, we will never do this again. Because what it meant is that at every stage of the process, we had to go to the couch cushions and figure out where the heck we were going to get money to make payroll. And we never had a budget, meant we never knew what this thing was going to cost to build. We never knew how long it was going to take. And we never really knew how we were going to do it, just that we were going to do it. And I think, there's something to that kind of gumption when you're a startup. There's reasons to play it that way, but never again.
Yeah, and I would add to that, we did not have the resources to adequately prototype. The game has, 18 scored games, in addition to the puzzles. But puzzles are easier to iterate and play with. But these games are very tech-heavy and very physical, and we weren't able to prototype them adequately, which means we had to do a lot of that in the most expensive and time-consuming possible way, which is like in situ. You build the whole thing, and then you're like, oh no, it doesn't work like that. I guess we pull the wall out and never again. Yeah.
We're going to move on to talking about Recon, but I highly recommend anyone who's coming to Recon, go play the ladder. And speaking of which, we are so thrilled to be having you talk at Recon Los Angeles this year. Your talk's title is Tell Better Stories versus Stop Telling Stories, a knockdown, drag-out debate between the owners of Hatch Escapes. This is the first I'm hearing of this title. Can you tease the talk a little bit for us? What should we expect out of it?
Well, Tommy and I are going to effectively take on roles. Neither of us feels quite as binary about this subject as I think we're going to present it, but we're going to be two different angels on two different shoulders of the industry and try to present the nuances of this argument. Is it worth it to continue to try to advance the storytelling form in these live interactive media, or should we maybe be barking up another tree?
I can't wait. I am wondering, what are you two hoping to get out of Recon 24?
I'm very excited for it to be in LA, which I think is the national hub in most ways, and for everyone to come to see what we've built. I'll be honest, I'm really excited to be able to share a ladder with the global community of makers. I think that's the thing I'm most excited about, and just having everyone around and an opportunity to talk.
Yeah. And I'm going to say something that could be taken as a dig at the conference, but that's not even close to what it is, because I think you guys do an excellent job of these conferences. And this is coming from someone that has spent a lot of his adult life going to conferences. These are the best conferences I ever attend. But the highest value of any conference, and this is not an exception with Recon, is the people that you meet there and the conversations you have with your peers.
100% agree.
The real value is, at the end of the day, is what happens when you're not at the conference, because these are the best conferences I've ever attended. But yeah, it's real.
Thank you. And yeah, can't wait for the after hours. We've expanded after hours.
Ooh.
If we can, Tommy and I are hoping to host a party the Friday before Recon at Hatch Escapes. This is essentially going to be our opening party for the ladder. Of course, we've been open for more than a month at this point, but as PG suggested, we are definitely still twisting dials, right? There's a lot of optimization that needs to happen with something that is this data intensive and that has this number of permutations. And by then, at the very least by then, hopefully a bit sooner than that, we should have a game that is fully dialed in, and we want to celebrate that with the community.
Can't wait for it. There are a lot of unusual things about Hatch Escapes games, but one that tends to jump out at players before playing is your price points, which run noticeably higher than average. Help me understand your pricing philosophy.
Sure. I want to be the leader in terms of all three metrics, which is to say, I want to be the most expensive room in our market. I want to have the highest production values in the market, and I want to pay my employees better than anybody else in the market. I think maybe that's the gesture of coming out of theater. Theater has long ago made the case that it is valuable enough to spend real money on. And, look, there should be all different kinds of theater and all different kinds of price point, but we are going for some intense productions with intense production values that are, hoping to be, at least from a production standpoint, on par with professional theater or theme parks. And you set a price point to try to convey that information. And of course, you have to deliver on that. But I'm perfectly comfortable being the leader with all those $ things.
Yeah, I think most people know this. So we talked about it in the LA Times article and everything, but the ladder cost well over $1 million to build. And we regularly see full days where we see 4 people every 2 hours. This is still underpriced if it were about trying to make it a profitable enterprise. So I certainly want everyone to know that we didn't set this price arbitrarily or to be greedy. This is the right price point for what it costs us to make and run, we promise.
What you are making is orders of magnitude more complex and interesting, and for me, fun.
Thanks. Yay.
Thanks. Hope so.
What is your approach at this point to balancing the demands of commerce, your desires as artists, and your audience's expectations?
Tommy and I, we fully understand that in order for Hatch to exist, it has to turn a profit. We're at least practical enough for that. But I guarantee you that the running of the business, the administrative side of this, almost always takes a back seat to the artistic endeavors in front of us. We're both a bit foolish enough that way. That is something that is going on. That being said, we're not idiots. I do have experience in business. I've run businesses of several different sizes. I have an MBA. I'm not a stranger to that world. But for me anyway, it's always going to take a bit of a back seat to, I want to get up every day and make the most beautiful thing that I can. And I'm going to be willing to sacrifice quite a lot for that endeavor. That being said, I just barely talked about wanting to be a leader in terms of price, cost, and pay. And I do believe in that as a business model. To a certain extent, I hate this comparison, but it's a bit the Apple model. We're going to make a premium product, and we're going to make it feel like it's worth paying more for, and we're going to spend more on it, and we're going to take decent care of the folks that are making this premium product. And that is a business decision. That is us placing ourselves in the market in a particular place.
We have a lot of very friendly debates, Terry and I. But in a perfect world, I think we would continue to make impractical artistic products for ourselves and take on some work for others that would help us make that viable. That would be like an ideal situation for me, so that our main products aren't mostly concerned with business, but as a whole, we can compromise through outside work.
Interesting. On a similar subject, how do you both handle disagreements and creative differences between one another?
We love talking about this. I've attempted collaborations many times in many different fields, and it has basically been only disaster and catastrophe in every other attempt, in every other medium. When I say that Terry and I have never had conflict in 25 years, it is the God's honest truth. Terry and I do not have conflict. It's mostly because of our personalities, and by our personalities, I mean Terry's personality. I'm like curmudgeonly, and I'm short-tempered a little bit. I'm very opinionated. Terry is also very opinionated, but you can't offend Terry. Terry is unoffendable. And when someone else is unoffendable, it makes you unoffendable too, because you know that you can go at them. Like, Terry can spend a week working on something, and I mean like a full week, and bring it to me, and I can be like, it's not right, man. And then he's like, okay. It doesn't create this. And we trust each other's judgment so much. So everything is just a conversation. And this is a really boring cliche, but it is true. We tend to live by if we cannot resolve, we have to go to a third method.
Yeah.
And we go there very fast. So if I like one and he likes two and we're actually butting, it's like, okay, what's three? Like we both have to give up on our one, and we just do that like that.
And I think it really does come from, we just trust each other so much. If one of us feels strongly in any way about anything, that is the ultimate flag for each of us that there is some better way out there. And until we're both gung-ho about something, it just doesn't make sense to fight for something, or at least not very long. I mean, sometimes we'll try to advance our individual causes with each other, and sometimes that works, but we drop that pretty quickly. As soon as we realize that there's real conflict, we know that there's something better out there we just haven't found yet.
One of the most common phrases between us, which I'm only just realizing, Terry, is the phrase, I won't die on this hill. Yeah. And what that basically means is like, this one isn't a fight. So like, do you want to fight for yours? Because if you want to fight for yours, I'm out already.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot.
It does.
This is great relationship advice. I feel like I just went to therapy.
This is how Lisa and I tend to operate also.
I believe it.
And Lisa is impossible to fight with.
Yeah. Although I think Tommy's being a bit too generous about my inability to anger, especially over the past couple of months as the stress of the ladder has built. I have snapped at Tommy a few times that I deeply regret, although my snapping is a bit like a baby panda having a temper tantrum. But it does happen.
It's very cute snapping. It's very cute snapping. And also, one of the cool things about Terry is he's both so busy and so ADD that one of the ways to win almost any debate with Terry is just make him debate you for too long, and he'll get bored and just be like, whatever, I can't keep talking about this. It works,
true.
You know.
That's very true.
So back before the pandemic, it was announced that the iconic New Orleans-based Escape My Room was opening up in the Hatch Escapes building. We have all seen that there is a submarine. swimming around on your top floor. Now, what can you tell us about the game, and when can we finally expect to see it open up?
Sure. I'll take this one because I have a lot of excitement about it. We are working in collaboration with Andrew of Escape My Room on something we're calling the Ick Society, and that is short for the Ichthyophagic Society. The premise here is that we, the players, are part of a club of seafood enthusiasts that comb the globe in our club's submarine looking for the world's most delectable seafood. But it's actually a story about a marriage gone wrong. And I'm quite fond of the basic setup of this piece, and also tonally. In many ways, I think it will actually be our first fully camp piece. There's a lot going on here in terms of visual appeal and rashness of storytelling that I'm quite excited about. But also, I think in many ways, it's actually the closest to Mother of Frankenstein in terms of integration between story and puzzle. Andrew brought some rules to the table about this game that I've had a blast trying to honor in terms of, one, it's entirely self-resetting. And something that I brought to the table is I wanted it to be, as much as possible, entirely diegetic. And between those two, I think we've created a really interesting set of puzzles and circumstances that I'm very excited to see finally get in front of an audience. The question is as to when we're going to see it. Hatch Escapes is moving in earnest, our build team, from the ladder to Ick Society as of June 3rd. It doesn't mean we won't be still working on the ladder. Heaven knows there's plenty to do down there, but the team is moving offices, moving setups, and refocusing as of June 3rd on finishing the ladder. Andrew handled the vast majority of the set build, and we're going to be handling the video production and the final implementation, the queuing, the lights, all that sort of thing. We suspect we're probably about a year out, but please don't quote us. Anybody listening to this podcast, we never know for sure. And on top of that, we talked about how, we're never going to do this without a plan again. When I say that June 3rd, we're moving to the Ick Society, we're moving to the planning phase, where we'll begin to answer a lot of those questions.
Okay. Well, Escape My Room is one of my old favorite escape room companies, and I am so excited to see what happens with this collaboration.
Well, David, you and a hurricane are responsible for this collaboration. I hope you remember.
Oh, that's true. I think, you were on our New Orleans 2 tour where the hurricane hit, and we snuck into a museum to play this game. We'll save that story for the bonus episode.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Speaking of unusual player stories, back in August of 2018, Lisa and I were playing the Pop Stars Room of Doom at Scrap in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Scrap wouldn't let us lock out the game as private, and we had noticed that a random person had booked into our game. As we were walking up to the building, we saw a vaguely familiar face, and it turned out that our random teammate on a Tuesday afternoon in a city that none of us lived in was none other than Tommy Wallach.
Crazy.
Just wanted to say thank you for being the greatest random teammate of all time.
Same goes. What an honor.
Yeah, no real question there.
Amazing. Fate. We're fated.
Yep. And I don't think we had actually met in person before that.
We definitely had not. That was it.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Tommy, you are currently in New York City working on your new musical, Vicky and Frank. What can you tell us about it?
Well, apparently I have a problematic Frankenstein obsession because our tabletop game was about Mary Shelley, Mother of Frankenstein, and this is a very light retelling of Frankenstein as well.
But hell, if any property can support it, Frankenstein can, because that is a rich piece of writing. That is rich.
It is good stuff. I mean, Poor Things. Poor Things is also Frankenstein, let's face it.
Yes, it is.
So it's about a teenage girl in the 1950s named Vicky, which is obviously a nod to Victor Frankenstein. She wants to be a scientist, but it's the 1950s, and she's a woman, so she can't really, but that's what she wants. She is dabbling in reanimating the dead. So the opening number is her attempting to reanimate a dead dog and failing. She realizes she needs more knowledge, so she ends up picketing her school in the hopes of their allowing her to take shop class instead of home ec. She succeeds, and in shop class meets the sort of resident heartthrob of the school named Frank, who she sort of bonds with in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense because she's an unpopular weirdo and he's a very popular kid. She misinterprets the relationship, makes a move on him, is rejected, shoves him, and he accidentally falls off a cliff and dies. She reanimates him, as her boyfriend.
That sounds amazing. I would like to see it also become reanimated as your next horror escape room.
Oh, God, we got to leave Frankenstein behind, Tara. We can't do it.
Seriously. Yeah.
To pull this all together in the end, one of the questions I wanted to ask you both, because I can't think of anyone better to ask this of, you've already talked about the parallels between escape room narrative and musical theater narrative. But I'm also seeing that there is this significant difference in that in musical theater, I think one of its strengths is that you always know what everyone is thinking because they're always singing their emotions. They're singing emotions that would otherwise be inappropriate in almost any other script, in almost any other medium. And escape rooms, I think, tend to have a little bit more difficulty pulling emotion out of characters and presenting that and making that a part of the game world. I'm curious how you see those differences, or maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think that there's a real struggle there because in order to achieve that, because the protagonist is the player, right? So it means you have to have an incredibly strong parity between what the player is actually doing and what you want them to actually be feeling. And that's so hard to do in the context of puzzles. I think it's actually one of the things I'm most proud of about what we've done in Mother of Frankenstein. And there are a couple of sections especially that I believe what we've achieved is the feeling of solving those puzzles is directly correlated to the feeling of the character in the middle of those actions. And the section that I point to the most, and probably the section that I think Tommy and I are most proud of, is in Volume 2, the research journal, where Mary is learning to be a scientist. And we make you do some real science, some hypothesis and evaluation. We make you grind up against the wall quite a bit. And we make you make some choices about how you're going to approach these problems that are not unlike the gesture to try to get to the truth at the bottom of nature. And I don't know that we have a perfect solve for that, and it's very difficult to do, and we've not done it all the time, but I know it's a goal of ours, that potentially you could integrate the feeling of doing what we're doing with the feelings that we want you to experience in the broader course of the narrative.
I'm writing a little book right now for this series called Boss Fight Books, which do little monographs on video games, and I'm writing the one on Outer Wilds, which is my favorite video game of all time on this question. And something I ended up thinking about when I was writing that book a lot is the fact that puzzles cut against emotion so dramatically. And I mean puzzles like puzzles, like a Sudoku. And I do think the answer to this is absolutely what Terry said, and really the main thing we were trying to do with Mother of Frankenstein. But if people know it, Outer Wilds is a really great example too, where it doesn't have what I call pure puzzles. It doesn't do those because there are ways to do puzzle adjacent stuff, things that require deduction and logic and observation, but that is very different from a cipher or a grid that you're filling out. And I think the goal for us will be to move in that direction if we're going to hope to land emotion in this form.
What comes next for the two of you? I know we've covered some of it, maybe all of it.
Well, definitely Ick. And there's some talk at some point. I think we'd like to recreate a Hatch venue on the East Coast somewhere, in part just because we think that'd be really fun, and in part because we'd like it at some point to actually be in a decent place financially, and that would help quite a bit with that. But then, of course, there's also whatever our next big project is. And I think, frankly, some of that will probably make it into our recon talk, because the real question of whether we want to keep advancing this narrative form or whether we want to explore other ways of creating these kinds of experiences that preference other things is an open question. But there is definitely a next big thing for us. We just don't know what it is yet beyond the Ick Society that we're obviously jumping into. We've always wanted Hatch not just to be a place where we create our experiences, but a place where we invite people we respect to come and bring theirs. And, you know, we've got some space, and we're getting near the end of this latter build, and we're in kind of an interim space where it's occurred to us that we meet interesting people in this space that are doing interesting work, and we'd like to have a space to invite them to. A black box theater where they can mount temporary productions, a space where lectures could happen, where learning could happen. We want Hatch to be a campus where brilliant, lovely people are making beautiful, lovely things. And that's part of that larger vision.
I'm so excited about that. It's only 5 minutes from where I live, so I want this. I want this for you and for our community at large.
Yeah, I love this also.
So, Tommy and Terry, what is the best way for people to follow your work or connect with you?
I mean, it's probably just to join our Hatch mailing list. Neither one of us is particularly involved in social media, for better or for worse, but we do have a mailing list that we post to fairly regularly.
Yeah, that's the spot. Follow us.
Fantastic. With this episode, we are closing out season 7.
Congrats! 7.
Woo!
Wow.
That's amazing.
Seasons.
Wow. That's a lot of work.
No joke. It's not a ladder's worth of work, but it's a lot of work.
Oh, it's real.
I want to say thank you to the both of you. I have, over the years, really gotten to know the two of you and your work. I've played everything in your building at least twice, and I love talking to the two of you. It's fun. You are challenging. I have to assume that at some point in this episode, one or both of you have said something that really poked someone in some strong opinion.
Thank God.
It's something that I adore about the two of you, and it's also something that I adore about your work. You can feel when you step into a Hatch game that it wants to challenge you on some level, and not just with the puzzles. And it's something that I deeply appreciate. I'm so thankful for your games, eager to hear your recon talk, and I'm so excited to see what comes next from your partnership and your team. Whatever direction you choose to go in, I know it will be thoughtful and thought-provoking, and I value that so much.
Wow, thank
Aw,
you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
David. That's so kind. Thanks for being such a perennial booster of us. Your endorsement of us has been a huge part of what's allowed us to stay in business and keep making these things. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's easy to do. Love the work.
I think also, David, the thing I most appreciate about the work that you guys do, your whole team, and where it's well aligned with us, is we want to advance this form very actively. We know it can be better. We want to poke around and we want to explore all the various corners of where it can be better. And we know that you've always been on the same team with us about that. So thank you.
I'd also like to give a heartfelt thank you to all of our listeners. This podcast wouldn't exist without you. We're so grateful for your support, for supporting us on Patreon, for writing reviews. It means so much to us. And if you feel like you've gotten value from this, we would love for you to join the community, support us on Patreon. You get access to the incredible Spoilers Club. At the $15 level, you can check out the episode that we did with Tommy and Terry about Lab Rat. There's a ton of good content. And again, the bonus episodes, you get access with that at the $5 level. We would just love to have you join us. And even if you don't, thank you for listening. Thank you for being there and supporting us. We're going strong. We're already starting production on season 8. It's going to be fantastic. So thank you again for being here with us.
Yep. We will be back in the fall. I cannot wait for you all to see what we have planned for season 8. It's going to be a good time. The Reality Escape Pod is produced by Teresa Piazza with support by Lisa Spira, Richard Burns, and Tommy Houghton. We're edited by Steve Ewing of Stand Inside Media, music by Ryan Elder, logo by Janine Proct, and all of this is brought to you by RoomEscapeArtist.com, your home for well-researched, rational, and reasonably humorous escape room and immersive gaming content and events. If we haven't made it clear enough this season, the Reality Escape Convention, Recon, is happening August 18th and 19th, 2024. Get your tickets and hope to see you at Recon. You can learn more at realityescapecon.com. Details in the show notes. Believe it or not, we are 10 years into Room Escape Artist. And it took a long time for us to decide that we were going to go and open up a Patreon, but we eventually got there because some loyal readers at the time were really insistent. Over the years, we have added a lot of different things to that Patreon. People at the $5 level get access to the bonus show for this podcast. Folks at the $15 level get the incredible Spoilers Club. But more than anything, they get to support all of the things that we're doing here. And it's hard to tell you just how much that means to PG and I, to the entire team at Room Escape Artist. We put in so much time, so much love, and so much energy into everything that we are doing here to support the escape room and immersive gaming communities, to push them to be safer and more fun, to be smarter and more efficient, to try and pull new players in. We're working on all of these things all the time. And the money and support that we get from our Patreon community is the fuel that keeps all of that moving forward. If you're a part of that, thank you so much. And if you have been considering becoming a part of it, give it a shot. We really, truly will appreciate it. Thanks. You can learn more about all of this at patreon.com/roomescapeartist. Big thank you to our highest level Patreon supporters: Karen, Dawnward, Panic Room, Piyush from SEO Orb, Olivier Escape, Escaparium, Byron Delmonico, Breakout Games, Keystone Escape Games, Derek Tam, Paula Swan, and Rex Miller. Thank you for your ongoing support. And thank you to all of our patrons at all levels.
You've made it to the end of this podcast. You must be an amazing, resilient, and very loyal person. If you're still feeling that delightful afterglow, why don't you head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you review your podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. It really means a lot and it helps us to spread the word.
The best thing about owning an escape room is seeing the way that people's minds break against it. And you learn so much about what you didn't know about people's minds and what you do. And one of the things that is most probably culturally upsetting, and yet nowhere is it more beautifully illustrated for you, is cultural misogyny. This is a great anecdote. You ready? No, but I'm serious. Bear with me. What's incredible is seeing the way that groups of people orient themselves to puzzles. And one of the things we learned early on for Lab Rat was it was such a problem that a group of men would stand in front of a puzzle and dominate it physically so that no one else could get to it. And behind them, the women that they were with would be saying the correct answer, but no one would be listening to them, that we finally went back and actually added pre-recorded audio cues for this exact situation. So there is a cue with Ratkenstein, the rat in Lab Rat, being like, isn't it funny how the males of the species never seem to listen to the females of the species, even when they are saying the correct answer? That is a pre-recorded cue in Lab Rat.
And we use it more games than not.
Yeah.
Yes, call him out. Call him out, King.
I'm so thankful I've never heard it.
You're good. All good.